Ooh! Look at that title art go. This is truly some high-tech stuff in 1992. 1992, of course, being the year that we also have... Yeah. Anyway, this is Neutopia II, released in 1992 for Turbografx-16 from Hudson Soft, the sequel to 1990's Neutopia game, which was basically a Legend of Zelda on NES tribute act, and quite a good one too. Improves on some aspects, deproves on others, but more or less a worthy game in that style of play. And so when it came to jumping into the sequel, I honestly wasn't expecting much, and fortunately Neutopia 2 met those slightly elevated expectations. I guess. This is pretty much more of the same, but with a new set of maps as well as some slight tweaks and improvements to the gameplay. I suppose the best way to describe Neutopia 2 is that it is essentially less of a sequel and more of a second quest for the original game. Only this time, instead of beating the game once, you had to buy a whole new game, which, when you think about it, explains the lost levels. Just to provide a bit of context, because I feel it's important here, Neutopia 2 saw release in Japan on PC Engine just shy of a couple months before Nintendo unleashed A Link to the Past onto Super Famicom, but in North America, Neutopia 2 hit TurboGrafx after Zelda's debut on Super Nintendo. So while Neutopia could easily be seen as Zelda at-home good effort kid, Neutopia 2, in either case, would come across as old and antiquated compared to the newer, much superior Zelda outing on the new 16-bit system. And while it'd be foolish to presume that Neutopia 2 had a snowball's chance of competing with or surpassing A Link to the Past, and let's be honest, I don't think anyone owning a TurboGrafx would have cared at the time, you'd at least want it to be better than its predecessor, and yeah, about that. So Neutopia 2 places you in the role of the son of the hero from the first game who has gone missing and you have to find him. Unlike the previous game, you get to name your character in this one. Only 6 characters, less than Zelda's 8, but more than Final Fantasy's 4. And then you go on your quest, which operates more or less along the same lines as the previous game, except instead of Triforces or medallions, you're seeking out key items which will let you proceed to the next part of the story. For you see, in order to complete dungeons, you'll need key items to overcome some of its puzzles, and some of these key items can only be attained at certain points through certain means, and usually requiring some other means to attain those early on. In other words, that isn't a convoluted word salad. Progression in Neutopia 2 is even more linear than its predecessor. The big issue I had with Neutopia is its less than open exploration. You had to clear each world's 2 dungeons before you could move on to the next, and though Neutopia 2 might have one huge overworld, there's less opportunity to go off the beaten path or break from the usual line of progression. This game sticks you on a more specified path, and even then you'd be hard-pressed to find out how to proceed because the game doesn't quite make out how clear despite its more populated overworld. And just to get this out of the way, A Link to the Past also had a bit of a less open feel to it compared to Zelda 1, needing certain items to access the next dungeon and such, but the game gave you other stuff to do in terms of seeking extra items like heart pieces and things of that nature. You don't really get that with Neutopia 2 other than, say, a hidden shop that will sell you goods at higher prices, which is... yeah, medicine for 500 gold. Pricey, but you can't get it anywhere else, bud. Oh yeah, just watch me. Ah, there we go. $200 for a fucking potion. You know, I wish the backtracking was a little more convenient, like a whistle thing or whatever, but I guess there's no reason to go back to earlier parts of the game in this game. Fortunately, Neutopia 2 has other changes for the better, I think. The first big change being that you can move and attack in 8 directions, which improves mobility considerably. Granted, much like the first game, the sword becomes somewhat trivial once you have acquired the Fire Stick of Burning, which remains a versatile tool of destruction, but the fact that you could stab in 8 directions, something you couldn't even do in A Link to the Past, is a step up at least. Fair enough. Of course, with a new title comes new tools, though not that new. You still have a lot of the old standbys from the previous game. Bombs to blow up openings in certain walls, medicine for quick healing, moss for lighting up dark rooms, and of course the ever-versatile fire wand that varies in attack depending on your vitality, though not quite the total sword replacement that it was in the previous game. But you also have new tools like a wind wand that also varies in attacks and proves somewhat more useful than the fire wand at certain points. You also have other one-time use items for quest-specific circumstances, and you even have a boomerang that can... Fuck you. Neutopia II retains the dungeon structure of the previous game, which in turn is inspired by the dungeon structure of the original Legend of Zelda. You already have a compass from the start of the game to lead you towards the boss, or whatever the end game is, so all that's left is to seek out the crystal ball that's essentially a map layout of the dungeon you're in, the boss key that opens the boss door, and of course your usual equipment upgrades for your sword, armor, and shield. But dungeons are no longer about medallions to unlock a final dungeon, but additional gear such as rainbow drop step ladders, aquatic gear to explore underwater terrain, and other such bits of equipment that lets you progress to the next portion of your very linear quest in Neutopia II. To go along with any pieces of equipment you may acquire through interactions with civilians in the overworld. And once again, much like in the previous game, openings you bomb out in the overworld will immediately regenerate once you leave the screen, which makes the backtracking a bit touchy and difficult, and also once again proving that door repair comes more easily in Neutopia than it does in the old Hyrule. And that's about it, really. There might be some new toys, there might be some new threats to overcome and new traps to endure, and the dungeons might be more expansive in some ways, some of them have multiple floors for you to explore. But in the end, Neutopia 2 is just Neutopia 1 and a little extra. Like I said before, it plays more like a second quest of the first game than it does a fresh new sequel, but even in that regard, it's not a particularly overwhelming second quest, I don't think. If anything, I think the more linear progression makes the game a tad easier than the first game. Anyone who has played Neutopia 1 will feel right at home with Neutopia 2, because it's more or less the same game underneath. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because the game is still fine. It controls just fine. A lot of the basic bits work as they did before, but part of the problem is what came before was just a lesser imitation of a more recognizable game, and having a sequel that's more the same... well, let's just say that it works for some franchises and for others not so much. Neutopia 2 is a very nice looking game. Obviously a rather vibrant and colorful game with some decently sized characters and boss monsters. The overworlds and dungeons you travel through are suitably nice looking. The dungeons, of course, suitably samey looking with only color changes to differentiate them. And if you've seen the last Neutopia video I posted a couple days ago, first off, my condolences. Secondly, you may have noticed I've said those exact words in regards to the visual output of the previous game, and true to form, Neutopia 2 retains the visual stylings of that previous game. There's some new stuff, sure, but it's all just very familiar fare. Been there, done that. I don't know, at least give me a new hat to wear or something. Would be nice. As far as the sound output is concerned, well, the soundtrack's a step up at least. I appreciate that Neutopia 2 has different overworld themes for the various regions you travel through in the game, and there are much more livelier tunes than in the first game, while they save the more mellow and somber tunes for the towns and dungeons and shit. Sound effects are on par with that of the first game. They're fine, they're functional, nothing special, they get the job done. With all that said, there is one part of the game that actually gave me a bit of a chuckle, if not for all the wrong reasons. At some point, you eventually come across your long-lost father, and the reunion is unfortunately short-lived, if you get my drift. So naturally, after this sad, somber moment, you're immediately warped back to one of the towns that has cheery music playing in the background. Riveting stuff here. Oh, and sorry if I spoiled the movie for anybody. So based on what I had heard about this game previously, I went into Neutopia 2 with the initial assumption that it was just Neutopia with a few tweaks and not much else. And sure enough, it turned out to be just that. And I can tell you straight up that if you enjoyed Neutopia 1, you will enjoy Neutopia 2. Other than a couple tweaks, new maps, a few new toys and monsters and such, and a much more straightforward line of progression, it fits that more of the same moniker just fine, but just the fact that you're on a more linear path with little room for deviation or experimentation makes this feel lesser compared to its predecessor, as if the scope was much smaller compared to what you had before, which gave you 4 smaller, self-contained, but distinct overworlds to explore, whereas here, the world might seem larger in size, but it doesn't necessarily feel it. And again, anyone who liked Neutopia 1 will like Neutopia 2 just fine because it's more Neutopia for your buck, I suppose. But if you're looking for an old-school Zelda-like game that's more open-ended and has more exploratory elements to it, Neutopia 2 is not that game. Hell, Neutopia 1 was barely that game, and yet this feels like a further step back from that earlier effort. And then people wonder why there was never a Neutopia 3. You know, aside from the whole PC Engine thing going bye-bye eventually in a couple of years, but still, would have been nice to have a final chapter to complete a trilogy of sorts, even if the last one ended up following the template established by Adventure for Atari 2600. Now there's an idea for the homebrew community. You're welcome.